Just days ago, US forces seized a Venezuelan oil tanker worth hundreds of millions of dollars. American warships are stationed near Venezuela's coast in numbers not seen in decades. The White House has placed a massive bounty on Nicolás Maduro's head, and President Trump has repeatedly refused to rule out direct military strikes or even a full-scale invasion. Washington says it's all about stopping drugs and criminals flowing into the United States. But with massive oil reserves sitting under Venezuelan soil and perfect for America's refineries, many are asking the question, is this really about narcotics, or is it about something bigger? Let's analyze the official reasons, the possible hidden motives, and why any escalation could carry massive risks, not just for Venezuela, but for the United States itself. Since September 2025, the escalation has been fast. The US military has already struck dozens of boats accused of carrying drugs from Venezuela, imposed fresh sanctions, and placed a $50 million bounty on Nicolás Maduro himself. Then, as weeks passed, a growing number of US Navy ships, including USS Gerald R. Ford carrier group, have been stationed close to Venezuela within striking distance, as if waiting for a signal to attack. The official reasons from Washington are drugs and security threats. Venezuela, Trump says, is a country that transits drugs into the US, and his administration is willing to do anything it takes to stop that. The United States indeed has a massive drug problem that causes tens of thousands of deaths every year and affects millions of families. However, if we look at the statistics, we notice that Venezuela is not by far the biggest drug exporter to the US. That country is actually Mexico. According to the DEA's 2025 National Drug Threat Assessment, over 90% of fentanyl seized in the US enters through the southwest border with Mexico. So if Trump wants to solve the drug problem by military intervention, it would be logical to invade Mexico first. Then he also said that Venezuela sent thousands of criminals and bad people in general into the US. But who is at fault here, Venezuela or the Biden administration that let so many people into the US without checking their backgrounds? It was the US that forgot it has a southern border. It's clear that all of these pretexts are not true reasons to attack a country. However, the actual reason, like an elephant in the room, is obvious for everyone. Oil. Venezuela has oil. In fact, Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. Venezuela's oil is what we call heavy crude, which is a thicker, lower quality type of oil. It needs special treatment to turn it into gasoline and other products. While many countries don't have the right refineries for this, the United States is uniquely positioned. The US has a lot of refineries that can handle heavy crude. It's a bit of a special situation because the US actually produces a lot of sweet crude, which is easier to refine, but it doesn't have the capacity to refine all of it. That's why the US exports some of its oil. At the same time, the US doesn't produce enough heavy crude to meet the needs of its refineries. This is where Venezuela comes in. Their heavy crude is a perfect match for the US refineries. Lately, there have been some X posts and statements from US officials like Stephen Miller that reveal the true reason why Venezuela looks so invadable. Venezuela is not only about oil though. To fully understand the US attitude towards it, we need to explain the Monroe Doctrine. In 1823, President James Monroe articulated a principle that would influence American foreign policy for generations. As newly independent states emerged across Latin America from the collapse of Spanish rule, European powers looked for ways to re-establish colonial influence. Monroe declared that the Americas were no longer open to European colonization, and that any attempt by Old World monarchies to interfere in the affairs of the New World would be viewed as a threat to the United States itself. In this worldview, the Americas are for the Americans. The United States viewed itself as the natural guardian of the region, committed to preventing outside powers from interfering in American affairs. Over time, as the US became a superpower, the doctrine evolved. In 1904, President Theodore Roosevelt added his famous corollary, stating that chronic wrongdoing or instability in Latin American nations might require the United States to exercise an international police power to maintain order and protect interests, effectively justifying direct interventions. This doctrine influenced American policy through much of the 20th century. The United States supported or orchestrated changes of government, sometimes peacefully, other times through violence, when it perceived threats from foreign ideologies, such as in Guatemala in 1954, where a CIA-backed coup removed a reformist president due to fears of Soviet ties, or in Chile in 1973, when Washington helped the military topple a socialist government perceived as too close to the Soviet Union. These actions, along with many others across the Caribbean and Central America, prove that the US sees the Western Hemisphere as its strategic backyard that has to be shielded from rival great powers. The 2025 National Security Strategy of the Trump administration specifically mentions the Monroe Doctrine as important in restoring American dominance in the Western Hemisphere and prevent outside powers, particularly China and Russia, to establish too much influence or control vital resources. Venezuela maintains close ties to both China and Russia, which means that the Maduro regime is a source of major concern from the perspective of the Monroe Doctrine. Right now, a shadow fleet of tankers is moving Venezuelan oil to China, bypassing US sanctions. Trump isn't just fighting Maduro, he's trying to cut off an important energy source for Beijing in the Western Hemisphere. First of all, let me be clear. The Maduro regime is incompetent, and people have a poor standard of living because of it. However, many regimes around the world are incompetent. Whether that makes it a smart idea for the United States to attack them is a completely different matter. Many of Trump's core supporters backed him precisely because he promised a break from the endless overseas wars of previous administrations. They agreed when he said that nation-building adventures drained resources with almost zero results. While many Americans support strikes on drug boats, if the US would start a direct conflict with Venezuela, even a limited one at first, it would lead to a drop in public support for Trump. Thus, if he attacks Venezuela before the midterm elections, the chances are the Republicans will get crushed in the elections. Beyond domestic politics, the consequences for the US would be more important. For years, American diplomacy has talked about respect for a rules-based international order, criticizing unilateral uses of force by other powers. A direct campaign against Venezuela without UN backing would be seen as pure hypocrisy, similar to the 2003 Iraq invasion. Many nations that are already skeptical of the Western world could see it as a confirmation that the rules do not apply for the US. In Latin America itself, even governments hostile to Maduro might react negatively. The memory of US interventions is still alive, and few Latin leaders want a Western Hemisphere completely dominated by Washington. China and Russia would seize the opportunity and use the American aggression to strengthen their ties with more countries from the so-called Global South and portray the US as an aggressive and selfish nation. So even if we leave morality aside, invading Venezuela would be a strategic mistake. No one can say with certainty what decisions Trump will make in the coming weeks or months. I think Trump has a tendency to make decisions based on instincts and not deep analysis beforehand. At such a high level of politics, such decisions often prove bad. The best example is the tariff war he started against China. Being surprised by the strong response the Chinese government had, he backtracked, which made him look weak. What do you think? Is this just a tactic to apply pressure on Maduro? Or is Trump really considering starting a war? Write your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed my video, give it a like and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next video.